Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. I'm excited to continue our conversation with Salt Lake Tribune reporter Peggy Fletcher Stack. In our next conversation, we're going to talk about two important events. One, where Dallin Oaks told her the church doesn't seek apologies nor give them, and also the time when she talked to President Nelson and said, "Hey, what about the women?" So you won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out.
But if you want to hear, let's go back to the SSR speech and looking at the themes. In 2015, the church was coming up with this compromise on LGBTQ. And they invited us to a news conference and gave us a few minutes alone with a couple of apostles, Todd Christofferson and Dallin Oaks. And again, in my mind, I'm thinking, I don't have very much time to ask questions. What should I ask? And it just kept occurring. And they had said they wanted to tap down incivility and try to come up with a compromise where people could speak more civilly on either side of the pro-gay marriage and the anti-gay marriage sides. And so I said to them, well, when I am in a fight with my husband, the best thing I can do is apologize for my rhetoric. And you know, I said, would the church ever apologize for its role? Or I think I said, I carefully worded it, something like, would the church ever apologize for the way the rhetoric of some members, I didn't say the church itself, but some members on this as a way of improving civil discourse? And Dallin Oaks said, no, we never apologize. And then that we never apologize thing kind of turned, he said that to me in response to a specific question. And then it kind of turned into church policy. People believe, oh, that's church policy that we don't apologize. I was like, no, that's not church policy. That's an answer he gave to me. And then also people didn't believe he said that because it was a private conversation, semi-private conversation. Unfortunately, I didn't tape record it. I mean, I did write it down, but I didn't tape record it. But then he repeated it the next. He and Christofferson were on what used to be Trib Talk. It was a video, podcast with Jennifer Napier Pierce, and he said it again. And he made it even worse and said, more strict. He said, apology isn't in the Bible. And people were like, you gotta be kidding. Anyway, so people blamed us, the messenger, and they also believed that was a church policy. So I started, when I was writing my SSR, that's how I started my speech. It was like, how interesting it is that something that gets said ends up being seen as policy. So then I looked at a speech in my first year by Apostle Boyd K. Packer, in which he said that the enemies of the church are are feminists, gays, and intellectuals. And then I went through my own work and realized those are the topics that I honestly have written about the most.
Are you public enemy number one?
Yeah, probably. But because those are pressure points, I try to tell people who don't understand journalism that we don't write about the planes that land on time. We write about the planes that crash. Mm-hmm. And so that's why it seems like negative, like our reporting is negative, because we write about conflict and where are the problems. It's not because we celebrate conflict. It's because journalists try to help point out and bring to light problems so that people can, solve them or work on them. So obviously I wrote about the September 6th the people from Sunstone, or, who gave presentations at Sunstone that were excommunicated. So that was the intellectuals part. The church had quite the conflict, tension with its own intellectuals.
I think it was right after the September of 93. I mean, that's why he gave the speech, or was it before? It was right around the same time. I remember that.
Yeah. And I knew all those people pretty well, so I had to write about that. And then I definitely wrote about feminism, which is obviously a big issue in the church, outside of the church, everywhere, women's issues. And I've continued to write about that to this day. It's still a big, big issue. And
would you agree it has died down since Kate Kelly was excommunicated, though?
No.
You don't. It has not died down.
I mean, just for my journalism's sake, I would say there aren't as many. I haven't observed as many women pushing for ordination. That has died down. The making women's ordination the center issue. I think the women who were involved in the ordained women movement either left the church over its excommunication of Kate Kelly, or became quiet, stayed in but became quiet. But the women's issue has never gone away, and it's still as hot as ever, just differently. We had last year, Annette Dennis gave a speech in which she talked about, she's a counselor in the Relief Society presidency, talked about how women have more priesthood power in this church than in another church, and that caused a huge, huge flap. There's still gender issues at women on the stand. There's just so many other women's issues. I guess what I'm saying is, as a reporter, I would say not as many stories about ordination, just as many stories about gender.
Oh, I see. Okay. Because it does seem like, from my perspective, there was the women want to attend the priesthood session, and fewer protests. I'll put it that way. Fewer protests now than when Kate was there. Although I guess the gender issues are still there, but it's less public. Do you agree or disagree? You don't.
Again, as a reporter, I don't know I guess I haven't written about a lot of protests on women's issues in the church, but I've definitely written about trends and concerns and issues relating to gender. I could write a story a week about that.
Oh, wow.
There's people very, very much concerned about it, and a whole generation of young women who are not satisfied with how the church is handling it. There's pushes to let young women pass the sacrament. There's push for women to sit on the stand with men. There's all kinds of those issues remain very potent.
Okay, interesting.
So then the last thing is the LGBTQ, as you know, is still very, very hot. When I checked, this is in my speech, when I checked our archives, I discovered nearly 700 of my articles with the word gay in them. So I've written up, more than 5,000 articles. And for 700 of them to be with the word gay, that means it's a thing. It's a topic that just keeps up and up and up, not going away anytime soon. And again, along the line of women, what you're saying is, I think that after the 2015 exclusion policy, which is what a lot of people call it, and then its reversal, it's calmed down a bit, but the church and the church has come up with some pretty nationally interesting compromises on LGBT and same-sex marriage, saying the church supports same-sex marriage as a national policy as long as there are exceptions for religion, which is very different than other Christians. So that's been interesting to watch. But if this administration somehow or this Supreme Court reverses that same-sex marriage stance, it'll be right back there.
For sure. There was one thing that I wanted to ask you about. I believe it was with President Nelson, where you had asked a question and then he kind of got sidetracked, and you said, "What about the women?" Can you tell that story? I love that story.
Yeah. So now it's President Nelson. It's, I want to say January 2018, maybe February 2018. 5 of us reporters were invited to ask one question each. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about that one question, phrasing it exactly how I wanted it. I asked him, I said the church has made a lot of progress on women. And I said, what will you do to get more women, people of color, and non-Americans involved in decision making? So commas, right? Mm-hmm. Women, people of color, and non-Americans. And then President Nelson says, well, I hope I'll be forgiven for saying Peggy has a sweet place in my heart. And he said, I knew her mother. I know her father. I know all 4 of her grandparents. I know her children. And he started going on and on about my family, which it was an awkward moment for me, for sure. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then at the end of his little thing about how much he likes me and knows my family, he said, now, what was your question again? Because he had spent so much time talking about my family. It was really not appropriate. But anyway, then he recovered and said, oh, yeah, non-Americans. And so he began to answer that about, the global church or whatever. Then President Oaks also spoke about that. And then I felt like they were winding down the answer. And that there were no other women among the 5 of us. No one else was going to ask that question. And so, and even though we were only supposed to have one question, I couldn't stand it. And so I called out from my seat, what about women? And then President Nelson said, oh, we love women. He has this many daughters and mothers and everything. And then he chimed in on that. And then Elder Eyring, we love women. And it was the weirdest existential moment probably in my career. Like I was like caught in the personal and professional. But it ended up being okay for me because I'm criticized from every side. And so people who think I'm the Antichrist for critical reporting on the church said, well, gosh, President Nelson likes her. She must be okay. And then the people that think I'm too soft on the church thought, oh, he treated her so condescendingly. And she's such a professional. How could he do that? And so I took it as a win-win. But I know a lot of people, it was like a weird moment.
Yeah, I remember that moment. It was funny.
Yeah, because it was on live TV. Yeah, again. So everybody saw it. And if it wasn't on live, then it was on the church website. So, yeah, there I was. Couldn't hide. Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Salt Lake Tribune reporter Peggy Fletcher Stack. In our final conversation, we're going to try to figure out what are some of the things that Peggy thinks about current events.
I get asked every single day, are you Mormon? Are you a member of the church? Are you a former member? Are you a never member? And my answer to them is always the same. I'm a person of faith. I will respect yours, but it's not your business what my faith is.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt. So check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.